The Legal Tea with Attorney Nix.
Hey, you are ready to use it?
Excited.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. Okay, first of all, this is the Legal Tea. My name is Attorney Nix, and this is my podcast where I interview, yes, a lot of guests who are actually former or current clients of mine is what I sort of have in mind. It's unfortunate, but in today's world, when it comes to lawsuits and employers and just this all aspects of law, sometimes the clients, they don't have a voice, right? Everything is just kept to within the realms of the courtroom or the workplace. And I think that this is a good platform to allow my folks, my clients, a current or former, to actually share their experiences. So I am so honored to have a former client of mine, Miss Kiondra Broadway. Yes, Miss. You're going to have to. Miss Broadway, first of all, I want you, of course, to introduce who you are, and then also to talk about some of the work that you've done, especially through Vantage Point Society. So if you can just let everybody know who you are and introduce yourself.
Yes, ma'am. Well, first, thank you for having me. But yes, my name is Kiondra Broadway. I am a former client of Attorney Nix. My background is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I am also particularly focused in ethical compliance. So that is what I do through Vantage Point Society. I provide senior consulting with organizations regarding ethical compliance, how to make sure that their legal blueprint is matching what the law says, and making sure that there's programs in place to make sure they're staying in compliance, also training and education. So that is the full focus of Vantage Point Society. So I'm very happy to be here today.
Man. So what I wanted to ask is, what qualifies you to even talk about DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion? Like, what is your experience? What has it been? How long have you been working in this particular field? And what can you sort of let us know?
Thank you so much for asking that. I'm happy to answer that. So I've been working in diversity, equity, and inclusion for over 10 years and working in different facets to both public and private sectors. And so in my role, I have had the pleasure of working with state institutions as well as corporate America in Washington, D.C., in Atlanta, Georgia, and also overseas doing this work. So I am very excited about this work. It's more than just the job. It's actually a passion of mine as far as really educating people on what it is, exactly what it is, and actually being able to actually implement it and not be a facade or representation, which I hope we get to talk about, but it actually being something that is practically implemented within the organizations and their fabric of their work, their policies, and the things that they do to garner business. So I definitely know I'm qualified, it's not by the years of experience, but just by being able to be an educator and consultant currently to provide that information for those who are looking to implement DEI in their workspace or those who just want to learn more about it. So I also have served as a professor. So I've also have taught this work as well. So this is something that, again, is a passion of mine, and it's more than just the work. It is a passion.
Passion. Yes, ma'am. And you guys have to check out Vantage Point Society. I want to read the mission. It's the Vantage Point Society exists to equip organizations, communities, and professionals with research-based tools and compliance best practices in effort to expand their worldview about different societies through education, training, and consultation. So please check out Miss Kiondra, check out her website. We'll leave it in the description of the episode so that you can just check out more about her background and experience.
The Legal Tea with Attorney Nix.
Okay, so let's start with this. And I
Okay.
just gave your experience. You just gave like what it is that you did. Talk about, well, you've been doing this for a minute because you started back when DEI was the thing prior to George Floyd, right?
Yeah, I do want to share about the history of DEI because I think it's going to be important to talk about the history of DEI before it was called DEI, if that makes sense. Okay. So when we talk about the history of DEI, I first want to break down what DEI is, because for the most part, when you hear the buzzword DEI, it's mostly racially charged or gender charged.
DEI sounds very nice on paper. I mean, diversity, equity, inclusion, who could possibly oppose such nice, lofty sounding words, right? But the people who think that fail to understand that what DEI actually translates to is the exact same thing that the old and thankfully now forgotten affirmative action regime translated to, which is systemic discriminatory racism against people who do not fit the idiosyncratic criteria that the DEI commissars and diversity crats seek to help. So put another way, if you are a white person, a Christian, an Asian, a Jew, you're going to get discriminated against, whether it's in affirmative action or in DEI.
People automatically think about race, particularly Black people, or persons of color, and then also when it comes to gender identity. So when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, you have to separate them all. So diversity is simply all the ways in which we are different. So there's different identities that we relate to, whether it is by our age, whether it's by ethnicity, whether it is our nationality. That's what diversity is. It's simply that. And so one of the ways in which I really highlight that is through the identity wheel. So if you Google identity wheel, it will have those bases, the age, ethnicity, your upbringing, and it blows us out to different identities that talks about like motherhood or political affiliation. This is what diversity is. It's just differences. And so diversity piece, we'll put that there. And then the next piece is the equity piece. Now, where are the laws that protect these identities? What are the laws that says that you shouldn't discriminate against these identities in the workplace? That's where diversity and equity comes in. And the inclusion piece is making sure that both are hand in hand. Diversity and equity are equal. They're separate, but they're equal. So when we're talking about DEI, you got to think about it in that whole concept of making sure all the ways in which we're different. How do we make sure that everyone feels belong, but also make sure their rights are not violated in the workplace, and we include them all together. So that's what in inclusion we have in the workplaces infinity groups. Which is also employee resource groups. If you have an institution that don't have a diversity program, they put everything on the HR, they're going to just call it employee resource group. And so they have these different breakout groups. And now it has progressed to infinity groups, where it particularly has, race focused groups are, identities that's based on gender, LGBTQ plus, etc. So DEI, that's what that is. Now, how do we come up with DEI? So when we think back of, as we mentioned already, some of the history and some things that kind of lean into DEI, but really the first marker was the women's suffrage in 1920s as relates to gender with women. And in that space is where women fought for the right to vote. Now, at that particular time, and there's a lot of tension around that, because the women that were able to fight for that were white women. Black women still wasn't considered to have a voice in that because they were Black, and they could still not vote because they were African American. So the ones that had to lead the charge were, at that time, white women. And so as that began to transition, so that's a staple in history as it relates to that.
The Legal Tea with Attorney Nix.
The next piece would be all of the other things, as I mentioned, with the executive order of 8802 by Roosevelt, where he then put into place making sure that the federal government and defense, the military, did not discriminate against race, color, or creed. And so after we done the 1920s, we done the executive order with Roosevelt in 1941. So then the next piece was the biggest turn as it related to race is concerned was Brown versus Board of Education. In 1954, we're ending segregation. So this means now where African Americans can go to schools where white Americans can go as well. So that began to open up the door for the next piece that rolled down, which was the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Okay. So the Civil Rights of 1964, aka Title VII, it is the bedrock for DEI, and I say that because it highlights the protected classes. And what are those protected classes? And I'm gonna read those for you. It is race, color, religion, sex, and in sex it includes pregnancy, sexual orientation and gender identity, and national origin. Now, this particularly 1964 Civil Rights Act, aka Title VII, was where it made sure that you could not discriminate against any of those protected classes as it relates to hiring, promotion, or determination. Like you can't discriminate based off those protected classes. And so those were the things that where it began in the workplace, and also not just in the workplace, but also in education as well. So, which begins the journey down affirmative action, and we're going to get there as well. Now, if you notice, the protected classes in 1964 were missing some other protected classes. You didn't hear me say disability. That wasn't in there. But later in 1990 was when the American Disability Act was put into law. And it was in 1991 when the Civil Rights Act 1964 was amended in 1991 to include disability. Yes. And also other another one is political affiliations. That's also something in there too. But particularly disability was added later in 1991 as an amendment of the Title VII. But they call that the Title I of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. So now that we have all these lovely things in place, there's later came, I will say, in 1965, there was an executive order requiring that government contractors to ensure equal employment opportunities, which also then later on led into the 70s where affirmative action began to come into place. And particularly there was a case between Blake and Regents of University of California of 1978 where a case was brought before the Supreme Court questioning about this race quota. Like, why is there a race quota as far as people of color, African Americans, getting into predominantly white schools? And so, and the dispute during that time was whether or not the minorities could reduce educational opportunities for whites without violating the Constitution. So that was proven that that's not here nor there as far as whether or not African Americans will reduce education opportunities. They're just asking for the opportunity to learn at the same rate as their counterparts and also have the same resources and opportunities. Now, as far as there's not a taking away. I think that was the biggest thing. There's nothing that is taking away from the Caucasian community by allowing another community to come learn at the same place in space. So moving forward from the 1970s, really when you see DEI as we know it began to come around during the Obama administration.
Thank you so much.
So,
thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Dick
Culture
Durbin.
and a modern culture where it's pushed back and it's like, you don't need it. Okay, so you said that when Obama comes in, that's going to transforms into the DEI that we recognize today.
Right. It was really becoming prominent in the workplace because previously DEI has been hushed under HR, especially in the corporate setting. And so, and that's where you have particular specialists who focus on affirmative action, because you have employees who they have that line on their application. We are equal employment opportunity employer. And so in that space, they mean that they take quotas of we make sure that every qualified person, no matter their race, color, creed, that if they're qualified, we're only looking at that. We're not discriminating against the protected classes. So that's what they're declaring. And when they declare that, they're putting in the affirmative action within their organization. And the one thing they need to know that once you have signed up as an institution to implement that, you can never reverse it. You have to always keep it. That's the law.
Ask you this, this is just a question. So comes down to like the actual hiring of the candidate that is going to be selected.
Mm-hmm.
You're saying that across the board, even in their hiring process, here to that, so they're going to make sure that they interview a disabled person, a Black person, or for the particular position.
Yes, that's why on whether it's federal or whether it's state, whether it is a private sector institution, you'll see on the application, they always ask towards the end particular questions as it relates to your race. It's all related to protected classes. They also ask about veterans. That's also another protected class that was added later. And then also they asked about disability. Have you ever had disability? Do you have currently or ever had a history of a disability? And so they put those markers in there because they are a equal employment employer, equal opportunity employer. So that's how they started. And even when I started with Augusta University, when I put in my application, I had previous conditions, but not as related to the ones I end up having later while working with them. But I remember when my first week there, the ADA coordinator did reach out to me and say, hey, I noticed based on your application that you had previous history of other things. Let me know if you need any accommodations. And so this is that process when they are making sure that even through the hiring process, post-hiring process, that they are making sure they're staying up with the law that they agreed to as far as affirmative action is concerned. So they are seeking to transform this. They have a different name that they want to use. They want to stay away from equal opportunity, which is managed by the Equal Opportunity Office Commission. And they want to dismantle that group and rename it as a merit-based system board. And that is in the Project 2025, where they want to make it a merit-based. And it's in essence the same thing, but they want it to, I know, it's in essence the same thing, but it's not. And when I say in essence the same thing, as far as making sure that there's certain groups that get certain things, but they don't want race associated. They don't want these protected classes associated with it, because it is under equal opportunity, the bedrock law, Title VII. And so if they can get rid of the language of EEO, because anytime anybody would hear EEOC or EEO, they think race. Black people, that's it, and as a professional myself, I often have to go in dismantling people, disarming people, saying, I'm not the Black officer, coming in. I'm actually here for everybody. And that actually throw people for a loop for that as well. But particularly with this administration, they want to move away from the term EEOC, and that is in Project 2025. And they want to change the name to the merit-based system board. And in that board, they want to basically put everything under HR. And usually in my history and experience, when the DEI office and HR are in the same office and not separate, there's not checks and balances. And for the institutions that have it separate, which I have worked in both. I worked in when they had it under, I've worked in the ones that's separate. When it's separate, there's checks and balances so that if individuals in HR are being unethical or breaking the law, you have an equal opportunity officer to say, hey, what we doing? Corporate America. They're really trying to transform it to corporate America. And the thing about it is the difference between the private sector and the public sector is that the public sector has to abide by the law. Like, not to say that the private sector can't or shouldn't or they cannot, but it's more accountability because it is now federal law. Like it is certain state laws apply,
Background that does make
It's corporate. Yeah.
the corporate language. He understands the corporate policies and procedures.
Right.
And that's
Right.
you would want to run America. But the problem that he's having is accountability with the Supreme Court, the accountability with the federal laws.
That part.
Why he's trying to put all these executive orders in, but like you said earlier,
They are pretty much requests. They're memos. There's no reinforcement behind it unless people that be or powers that be are enforcing them. And that's why there's been such a big hiring let go or hiring freeze because they want to put people in place that's going to reinforce these executive orders while it's going through the process of becoming law, So just putting that out there.
The Legal Tea with Attorney Nix.
But as far as Project 2025, just reiterating, if you want to learn more about the Merit System Protection Board and replacing the EEOC, that is particularly on page 69. Particularly on page 69 but really highlighting the summaries, page 69 through 70, that talks about the merit-based system board and why they want to replace that with the EEOC. And as you read it, you see that it becomes something that is all under HR. It's not separate. So that's the direction with that. And then particularly also talks about the Schedule F. So a Schedule F was an executive order that was put in place in the Biden administration. And it is also there in Obama's administration as well. So it's really where it's the rights of civil servants, making sure that they're being protected by Title VII. They're being protected by all of the references for protected classes relates to disability and all the other ones where the federal government must abide by that. And so the Trump administration reversed it the first term when the Trump administration was president in his first term. And now again, he's reversing it again because the Biden administration brought it back when they came to say, we want to make sure that our civil servants are protected. And so now it's also has been attacked. And also an executive order has gone out to basically veto what Biden administration did to keep it going, Schedule F going. So there's a lot of information and articles out there that talks about what the White House stance is on Schedule F and why their I guess tactic or approach and the Schedule F, which is more so like making sure that it's not difficult to let go of bad performers, in the federal government. That's they're using those type of stances to remove this piece. But then on the other side, there's articles out there to say, but Schedule F has other things that's more important, like discrimination, that we want to make sure that we want to keep protecting our civil servants.
EEOC and why is this such a big deal? It's such a big deal because, first of all, especially if you are if you have a private type job, even if you have a state job or even if you have a federal job, the EEO office or the EEO is going to be your first stop if you believe that you have been discriminated against based on those protected classes. You can't just go straight and file a lawsuit if you believe that you were terminated because of your race or your disability or whatever the case. You have to go through a process. So what's important to understand is that the process, that it's not a perfect process. Let's be clear.
Let's be clear.
It's not a perfect process. It isn't. You have to, file your charges of discrimination with the EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Sometimes they have people do the interviews, determine whether or not they should file or have the person to file. So it's a process. They have 180 days to investigate. Sometimes it's longer. And then at the end of that process, if they believe that there is, I don't want to say no merit, but if they don't find a discrimination, they will issue you a right to sue notice, or RTS. That's when you can go and, file a lawsuit. Now, it's a little different, though, with the federal employees, because the federal employees, when you're a federal employee, you have a constitutional right to your job. They can't just fire you without due process. With the private sector employees, they could get, you're at will, typically, especially here in Georgia, they could fire for any reason, as long as it's not based on the protected class. But again, there's no hearing that you have to have. There's no rebuttal that you can make. When you fire, you fire. But when you're a state employee or a federal employee, they can't just terminate you without notice and without following due process. Because within the Constitution of the United States is a protection for federal workers, state workers, etc. So I just wanted to just sort of pinpoint that when you were talking about how he wants to sort of strip that down and make it to where, okay, everything now is up under HR.
Yes. And so in essence, mirroring what corporate America mostly does as it relates to DEI, putting it under that umbrella and not keeping it separate. Now, there's some institutions in corporate and private that do the model of keeping it separate. And there's ones that have it under. And in my experience of the ones that's been under, a lot of people's rights are violated. And they mostly move in the direction of protecting the powers that be, the leadership that are violating lower employees' rights. So, unfortunately.
So, and this is something I put in a note. The bandit at White America put over deep racial cuts after the George Floyd and Arbery cases. So, I know again that, and to your point, you want to express it again where you say it's not just a Black day, D. As I just said, it's a multitude of things, but still with DEI, what happened in this post George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, especially in the private sector, because we see what Donald Trump believes, and I know he's already as the private sector as well. For if you have these, if anybody basically has types of DEI that's implemented into their company, they could get money, federal dollars. So what's that about? What's going on?
So when George Floyd happened, I was in Asia. I was working on a military base. And so working for state and federal, because the institution that I worked for on base was a state institution, a college. And so so a lot of my scope as a DEI professional was more so federal and state. And so during that period, though, it was very particular as far as how do we respond, but it was so prominent. And us even being overseas, and the impact was still heavy where we were. And it was impacted. It was even on base, it's like a mini America. And so we still had the same impact. There was a lot of tension around not being able to voice. And there was a lot of tension because of the federal restrictions of certain things that some people couldn't voice what their grievances and how they felt, and which also led into the grievances they have in the workplace about just being Black and feeling like they still got their neck. Certain superiors have their neck on their foot on their neck. Yes. And so, but one of the prominent things that I realized too, even in the conversations with leadership about how can we still give our people, our employees what we need, they also wanted me to lean in on, what are other companies doing? Right. And is there other things that we can implement that's still in alignment with federal and state, that's still in line with these things? And so one of the things during that time we did was listening parties. And that was something that was across the board, federal and state, where people, we have an all town meeting, all staff meeting, where all of the employees in the division, and we have a 28 decentralized division. So that means people in Korea, in Japan, in Okinawa. And so all of us getting on a call with our vice president, that's who I worked for, with the vice president, myself there, and leading a listening session where people pretty much just have the safe space to talk about the impact of George Floyd and how that is transitioning into impacting their mental health and even working. Like, you can't separate the two because you're Black. You can't separate the two because you're part of that. You're part of the Black community who has to go to work and also suppress and oppress the feelings that you have. Even also, if you also felt that way or felt those same emotions. And we also had a listening party, and it was during that time right after George Floyd where there was an attack on the Asia community in the States. And there was Stop the Asia violence. Yes. So we also had listening parties then. And so really what the listening parties did, especially post George Floyd, was allow for people authentic selves to show up to work and be able to voice their grievances. And I will tell you, during this listening party, there was one person that got on the call and was like, well, I also have been discriminated against, and there's not, basically any support around this, and I've been called a racist. That's what it was. I was called a racist. And when I tell you so we live, and I'm getting messages from council members, diversity council members, and people who are not even part of council. Like, are you for real? Like, and even people in the chat, in the virtual chat, to the person, like, are you for real? Is that about you? It was a whole lot. And because, again, my role is not limited to one race, that person basically, their grievance led into a discriminatory act where they were discriminated against because they're white. So I had to do an investigation because they were accused of being a racist publicly and like in the workspace. And so,
You accuse a white person of being racist publicly? I am not.
So, but I think it's important to highlight this too, because again, for the most part, when people hear DEI, they think it only relates to Black people or persons of color. But as a DEI person, if you really stay true to what the sound of what the law is and what it represents, you have to be neutral. You have to represent and do your due diligence of all parties.
The Legal Tea with Attorney Nix.
People who think that, it's just too liberal. And you have people sometimes, I feel like, who are on the outside looking in, who really don't have experience to know what it is. Oh, it's CRT, the critical race theory. So could you please sort of find the nuances between the two?
Yes. So DEI versus, now that we know what DEI is, it is more comprehensive. It's not just limited to race, but particularly critical race theory. The race is in the name. It is focused on people of color. And is mainly focused on the history and the equal rights of marginalized groups, people of color, who are particularly people of color. And so critical race theory is making sure that it's infiltrated in the fabric of the institution's education training, awareness training, ethical training, so that people are conscientious of when they see a woman having a serious face, she's not mad. A Black woman having a serious face, she's not mad. She's just probably thinking, you know what I'm saying? So it's it really focused on the nuances of particularly as it relates to the race of that particular group. Whereas DEI, it does focus on that, but it also focuses on so many other things as well. But it has a narrow focus. Critical race theory has a narrow focus on that, particularly.
Well, I'm just really curious to see how, you know, how things unfold within these next 3 years. One of the things that I always say is it seems like the days are going by so quickly, but it's like Trump has been in office forever. It just seems like it's like, oh my gosh. So it's just really interesting to just be living in this period because, okay, when did you notice that it's like, this should be a question. What has happened to DEI officers and people like yourself recently under this administration? As you hear targets, they're rolling back their DEI initiatives. I say, hey, reneging on us because they made a promise and now it's like, okay, Walmart. It's sad though, because Walmart, a lot of them are in food deserts. So it's like, even if you want to boycott Walmart or, like you did Target, it's like, because of the fact that it's like a slap in the face now that Trump is in office and it's almost like the fish stink from the head down. If DI and these types of things are not important because, I'm sure it has been beneficial in the workplace. Y'all have metrics show that this is something that helps, in the workplace. But what is going on now with DI folks like yourself? I mean, are y'all soiled or y'all?
Tobias is an expert in public policy implementation, including DEIA, and programs focused on training the workforce and managers to be more inclusive of all groups. He believes the order goes too far.
The president has the right, as the president of the United States, to abolish DEI programs. I don't think he has the right to punish federal employees by putting them on administrative leave and abolishing their jobs for doing the work they were assigned and doing it well.
So yes, so there's a mixture. It depends on the organization. So the ones that are pulling back, like Walmart and Target, removing their DEI departments. Yes, people in that field is losing their jobs. And unfortunately, there's some institutions that still say we are DEI. We are still this. We still are DEI, basically DEI institutions. So it just depends on the institutions. And some institutions are renaming themselves. They're still doing DEI, but renaming it. And it's probably because they may have some type of federal funding associated. So that's what we're seeing. And for as what I will say the silver lining in this has been for me as a DEI professional is being able to really highlight what DEI is and highlight my particular niche in DEI, because my niche is ethical compliance. And having the opportunity to really have the conversations with people about the work and what it means, and my particular role in it. I have a colleague that I met through a hiring event where she particularly focused on the affirmative action piece as relates to DEI. So, and she works for the federal government, and they're slowly coming down to their office. She says it's a matter of time. They're gonna cut us, and so I'm trying to figure out what I'm gonna do next. And so, pretty much what we're doing is rebranding ourselves because DEI has been so prominated with a lot of propaganda and really saturated with it being so racially charged that we have to, and especially by the administration, that we have to fight against it to say, no, this is what DEI is, or this is what it has been in my role and what I've contributed to DEI. So that's what the silver lining is. It forces us to give a voice to what it really is. We also want to get the federal state funding as well. We want to keep the money going. So, and that's in a lot of organizations when they talk about DEI, they know it's a good gimmick or ploy to draw people and then do a switch and bait. Because once you get into the organization and you realize y'all don't really care about us. So, and that's why when you are a devoted DEI person, you have to be a person who really had to fight against leadership. And I say fight against leadership, but I'll say push against, be not afraid to rock the boat and try to advocate for leadership who is biased against the work of DEI, but love the revenue of DEI, but don't believe in the value of creating a space, a real practical space in the workplace of DEI, of really contending with them in a way where it helps to convince the value of the work and what it really does. Not just bringing in the money, but these are human beings. These are people who are contributing to your mission. These are people who are contributing to not only just the bottom line, but the overall health of the longevity of your company. And so I often had to find myself at odds with certain leadership. I was fortunate, like I said, overseas, working for the VP who valued it, but then also there was people in the leadership team that was like, nah. So they're like, nah. And so they went with it. It's like, so trying to really strike that balance and really helping them see the value of it.
So if you would be able to speak with any CEO or someone who is on the fence about hiring a consultant to help, because it's inevitable. We have a diverse workforce. You can't just sanitize everything and make everybody uniform, like it's not going to work. We have different cultures. So if you could speak to someone who's listening, who may be on the fence about having a, DEI department unit,
I would say to them that putting a diversity, equity, and inclusion person in there is a value because they're able to help you cultivate a sense of belonging within your organization. I know you may say, well, I already have HR for that. HR has different functions. It's different in different functions where they mainly focus on a lot of administrative things, benefits, payroll. They have an engagement. Yeah, they're right. They have the engagement thing, but it's not a really fine-tuned focus. And so as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion, there is a particular focus on different types of groups. And also, so that may pertain to your customers or your employees, whether it's external facing or internal facing. It focuses on both. And particularly as it relates to the equity piece, I know you have a legal team, but DEI also works with a legal team as well, because there's different aspects as it relates to the race, as it relates to age, as it relates to all these different aspects of diversity that relates to the law. And so DEI people have a more robust experience as it relates to the different nuances of these different groups. And that is the value of a DEI person. I stay true to this work because I see it work and I see the benefits of it. And so that is why I'm still a diehard DEI person, or AKA ethical compliance person, because I see the value of having people in place, of fighting and advocating for people's rights, also creating safe spaces and workplaces for people to work and be themselves and contribute to the mission that they chose to sign up for. So that's what I would say.
I pray God's favor over you. How did y'all let this get away? Like, Miss Broadway is a woman of faith, and you are so awesome. And I just pray blessings over your life.
Thank you. I receive it. Thank you so much. Thank you. In Jesus' name.
Yes, in Jesus' name. For closing thought, the truth is DEI is not new. It's not a liberal fantasy or trend. The essence of DEI has been America's operating system since its founding. Our legal history, from Dred Scott to Plessy to the gutting of affirmative action, it shows a pattern. But patterns can be broken, policies can change, and history can be faced. The work is ours to do. Thank you so much, Ms. Broadway, for joining us and bringing us the fire in the fat. For our listeners, stay bold, stay informed, and always sit slow, because this tea is hot. Good night, I'm Attorney Nix.
I do it with the pinky.
The Legal Tea with Attorney Nix.